You know, if enthusiasm means anything, I'm standing in front of one of the great museums of the world, the Rhode Island Computer Museum. They've got just about everything here, but one thing they don't have. Stay tuned. Like the dark side of the moon, there's plenty of dark side to the story of computing. Think of this series as your flashlight, or as they say in London, your torch. Now remember the hint I dropped at the beginning of this video. Well, today's story is about a crazy steam-operated computer from 1831. No, I'm serious. It was designed to be run by steam, or if steam wasn't available, with a hand crank. They didn't have anywhere to plug things in back then, so they went with steam or muscle power. But before I get to the juicy stuff, let's shine our flashlight on the inner sanctum of computers, the CPU. So, Alan Turing defined a computer as a universal machine. In modern terms, I guess we would say a computer is something that has a central processing unit or a CPU. Now, I don't want to drown you in detail. Well, let's be honest. I can't drown you in detail. I'm just a page ahead of you on this stuff. But here is the gist of what happens under the covers. The CPU is the heart of the machine. It's the CPU that transforms the incoming stuff into the outgoing stuff. The CPU itself, they vary, but in general, the CPU has a control unit which moves data and opcode instructions around in the computer, and an arithmetic logic unit that does the actual calculations and some specialized pieces of memory called registers. Computers also need keyboards and monitors and printers and speakers to get stuff in and out, as well as a way to accept a program. Put that all together, add a clock to synchronize everything, and you have a computer. Now, we might not recognize those elements when we look at this ancient steam-operated computer I'm going to tell you about. It's just a big bunch of gears and rods. But the equivalents were there. So who was this guy who conceived of the idea of a computer-like machine a century before anybody else? Who was Charles Babbage? Babbage has been described as an irascible genius. He was a hotshot at math and science from a very young age. When Babbage was 11, he decided to use his scientific skills to figure out if the stuff they taught him in Sunday school was true. So he sneaked into a deserted garret, opened the window, drew a circle on the floor with blood from his finger, and read the Lord's Prayer backwards. He figured that the devil would come sniffing around to see what was going on, and that would give him a glimpse of the bad guy. But the experiment was a bust. Now, I'll leave it for you to draw your own conclusions about what went wrong there. Babbage was just as irreverent when he got to college, where he got into a big battle over how they were teaching calculus. Let me give you a little background here. Trinity College's great alumnus was Sir Isaac Newton, one of the two inventors of the calculus. The other guy was Wilhelm Leibniz. Newton came up with the idea first, but Leibniz published first. The battle over who really invented the calculus is still ongoing. In any event, if you managed to stay awake in class, you probably remember difference equations. That's because we learned calculus the Leibniz way. But Trinity College, where Sir Isaac Newton taught, was still teaching about fluxions, Newton's approach. which, to Mr. Know-It-All, was a travesty. Instead of keeping his head down and going along with things as they were, Babbage formed his own little group of math heads and started publishing papers on why difference equations were so great. He graduated in 1814. I don't imagine he was greatly missed. After Babbage left Trinity, he married Georgiana Whitmore and moved to London, where he pursued his interests in geology and astronomy. It's probably his work in astronomy that got him hooked on math tables. Before computers, astronomers had to do computations using math tables. These tables were prepared by big teams of human workers who were called, don't laugh, okay, computers. Because the process was so error-prone, Babbage started to thinking about how the process could be improved, so he went looking for books. Today, pretty much everything you need is on the web. You ask an AI agent and you get your answer. In those days, you traveled around to see if there were any great new books on a particular subject. Didn't hurt if you had the money to buy them. Now, while Babbage was poking around France looking for scientific books, he met a guy named Gaspard de Broglie. De Broglie was creating tables, log and trig tables, with a team of 90 people. The interesting thing is how he went about it. He had his assistants specialize in different aspects of the work. That was a big variation from the practices of the time. Babbage thought that was a pretty good idea. In fact, it came in handy after he returned because he had to help an insurance company put together actuarial tables. Right about that same time, Babbage was working on a plan for delivering mail, which I am told was the inspiration for our modern postal systems. So, let's catch up with ourselves for a second. Babbage blazed a trail through Cambridge College, produced a dozen papers in mathematics with help, devoured geology and astronomy, studied how math tables can be improved, helped found the Royal Astronomical Society. I don't think I mentioned that. Laid the groundwork for a modern postal system. He even invented a cowcatcher for locomotives. That's a lot. So now you know what they mean when they say that somebody is a polymath. He was a polymath. Although I think you could more accurately say he was a sort of a gentleman scientist who could afford to pursue his many interests. Babbage would go on to publish almost 100 papers on a wide variety of subjects and would invent many things. Two of Babbage's more interesting inventions, I'm not even going to try to list them all, are the ophthalmoscope. That's the thing your eye doctor uses to see the fundus in the back of your eye, and the altimeter. He also had a keen interest in, are you ready? Lock mechanisms, ciphers, chess, submarine propulsion, diving bells, weapon systems, geology, chemistry, economics, electricity, actuarial mathematics, astronomy, statistics, and he was very, very, very interested in mechanical engineering and very good at it. Word of Babbage's fame was starting to spread abroad as well as at home. Now, England in the 1800s wasn't a pull yourself up by your bootstraps kind of place. Most, not all, but most of the high-profile names that we hear from that era were privileged families like Babbage's. If Babbage was a genius, he was a flawed genius. Babbage doesn't seem to have cared very much for commoners. He tried to get street music banned, especially organ grinders, and he did some kind of a study of broken factory windows to prove street people were breaking a lot of windows. But in London, Babbage was the man. His house on Dorset Street was a big-time social hub. Celebrities and socialites of all kinds attended his soirees, where they discussed science, literature, and art. His guests included Charles Dickens, Felix Mendelssohn, Charles Wheatstone, Charles Darwin, Alexis de Tocqueville, Michael Faraday, and of course, Ada Lovelace. John Herschel, the son of the very famous astronomer William Herschel, was a frequent guest and a close friend. And Lovelace will wind up popularizing his work later in his life. So there's more, of course. I mean, I haven't even touched on Babbage's efforts to reform scientific organizations, but that's really not why we're here. The reason that we are talking about Babbage is because of his work with calculating machines. Babbage really believed in the idea that machines could do this stuff. That was his passion. He wanted to make a machine that could fill in all the numbers on math tables. He wasn't really trying to make the universal machine Turing would talk about a century later. If he could just get something that would grind out tables, that would just be great. So his first shot was his difference engine. That was in 1822. The difference engine would use the method of finite differences, does that ring a bell? To interpolate between numbers for computations. He got a gold medal for that idea, but even more important, he got a big grant from the government to build it. Well, in 1822, his idea for a machine began to take shape. Things went great at first. The prototype came together fast, but the full machine was hard. He worked on that for 7 years. Babbage, being Babbage, he was, of course, distracted by other things. There was that project for the insurance industry that I mentioned, a treatise on the construction of mathematical tables, experiments with electricity, and papers on machinery and mechanical engineering. But in spite of all the distractions, he worked steadily on his difference engine until 1827. That was a bad year. He lost his son, he lost his wife, and he lost his father. His difference engine wasn't finished, but he just felt he had to take off for Europe to ease his mind. He traveled around for a while, inspecting machine shops and factories and meeting some of Europe's top scientists, until he was notified that he had been appointed Lucasian chair at Oxford. That was a huge honor that unfortunately didn't come with much of a salary. But he would be sitting on a seat that was occupied by Sir Isaac Newton himself. So Babbage was psyched. He returned to England excited and full of ideas. That's when he wrote a book called On the Economy of Machinery and Manufacturing, which was probably his most influential work. It brought the ideas of Adam Smith into the industrial age and introduced key elements of efficiency into England's emerging manufacturing sector. In 1834, Babbage came up with the idea for his analytical engine. Now, it's the analytical engine we talk about when we compare Babbage's machines to computers. The analytical engine was much more complicated than his difference engine. So he had to get busy with new designs, new plans, and new descriptions. Babbage's new machine used decimal arithmetic, just like we were taught in school. When a column of gears reached 10, a mechanism carried the result to the next column, where that set of gears began counting 10 times bigger numbers. That's the simple version. Now, I couldn't begin to describe the complicated version. What I can tell you is the damn thing was huge and getting huger. When it was finished, it would have been 25 feet long, 15 feet tall, weighed tons. It would have been about the size of a steam locomotive, well, a small one. Anyway, here's the rub. The British government had given him £15,000 to help pay for materials and salary for a skilled machinist, But they had lost patience with him. In 20 years of work, he had failed to complete a full working machine. In the fall of 1842, the Chancellor of the Exchequer informed him that the government would no longer provide him with funds. Well, Babbage was ticked off about it, but there's nothing he could do. Rich as he was, he couldn't complete the machine with his own funds, but he never gave up either. He refined the design of the machine, carefully describing the motion of each part in a notation that he himself had devised. And his ideas about calculation were still circulating in England and in Europe. Queen Victoria followed his work. Her husband, Prince Albert, even visited his shop. Although Babbage never completed the analytic engine, his son Charles eventually managed to build part of it, and by 1854, manufacturing techniques had advanced to the point that a father-son team in Sweden, George and Edvard Schues, I hope I'm pronouncing that right, were able to make a much smaller, much lighter version of the difference engine, his earlier machine, that actually worked. This showed, finally, that Babbage's ideas were real. The Schues engine was exhibited at the World's Fair in Paris before it landed at the Dudley Observatory in Albany, where it was actually used to compute astronomical tables. And Babbage, who was still alive at this time, felt that he was vindicated by this. He promoted the Schues engine hard as a demonstration of his foundational concepts. Although the Schues engine wasn't a universal machine, it was a big step forward and a testament to the power of Babbage's initial insights. Okay, so we need some kind of a summary here. What are we going to say? Babbage didn't get it done. But given the state of the art of manufacturing at the time, it was probably a bit too early anyway. Still, his intellectual leadership and the sheer power of his ideas were validated by the Schues' success. So it's a good example of how a visionary can profoundly influence and enable future generations to achieve what was once thought impossible. Babbage believed that one day, calculating numbers wouldn't require huge teams of people bent over desks. He believed that some kind of device would do that stuff. I'm making this video with a versatile device that shows how right he was. Okay, thanks for watching. Be sure to drop by the museum. That's the Rhode Island Computer Museum. And keep an eye out for my next video, the 118 Lovelace. I'll catch you next time.